Stellar Miracle has officially released over in Japan, so as tradition, let's take a look at some of the noteworthy cards we could expect to see pop up once Stellar Crown releases over in the West later this year. As always, if there is a card I didn't talk about, I either mentioned them in a previous video, or I personally thought they were not worth talking about. But feel free to let me know in the comments your thoughts about the cards in this set. Without further ado, let's begin, as always, with the Pokemon themselves. But before we get into the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, as your support really does help out this channel. Starting off with Ledian, a 90 HP grass type Pokemon boasting a niche but strong ability, which reads, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may switch in one of your opponent's benched Pokemon with 90 HP or less remaining to the active spot. The key wording on this card is 90 HP or less remaining, so while you can use this ability to gust up a low HP basic Pokemon or even some stage 1 Pokemon, you can also pull up a Pokemon that has taken damage, as long as its remaining HP is 90 or below. The only issue is that once the ability has been used, the card will just sit there and take up a bench space that could be used for other cards. It does have free retreat, so I guess it could also be a good pivot option. You could use its attack, which for 2 colorless does 70 damage, but its damage isn't affected by any effects of your opponent's Pokemon. So you could gust up something and then attack with Ledian. But even then its attack also isn't affected by weakness either, so you can't even double your damage. It could see play as a 1-1 line in order to help gust up a Pokemon for the game-winning attack, but the limit to 90 HP or less remaining is hard to accomplish for some decks. The ability is good, but if the cards see play, we'll have to wait and see. Next up is Hydrapple EX, a 330 HP grass Pokemon with a very powerful ability and attack. Its ability reads, once during your turn you may attach a basic grass energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon. If you do, heal 30 damage from that Pokemon. A very similar ability to that of Ogerpon EX, but with noticeable differences. Ogerpon's ability can only attach the energy to itself, but it also draws you a card, while Hydrapple can attach the energy to any of your Pokemon, doesn't have to be a grass Pokemon, and then heals them for 30 damage, which for some decks could be the difference between 2 turn KOs and 3 turn KOs. You can use the ability to power up something while also healing away any damage it might have taken. Using multiple copies of this card's ability will lead to huge amounts of damage with its attack. For 2 colorless energy, it does 30 damage, plus an additional 30 more damage for each grass energy attached to all of your Pokemon. Playing this card alongside Teal Mask Ogerpon means you can get a lot of grass energy into play and thus hit for a lot of damage. Not to mention that the best deck in the format is weak to grass Pokemon, giving this deck a big advantage. Not to mention the plethora of grass support we have recently received in the past few sets could help make this deck the next top contender and possibly the new Charizard killer. But as always, we'll have to wait and see what Japan does with the deck. Next up is Salazzle, a 120 HP fire-type Pokemon boasting a very annoying attack. For 2 colorless energy, it doesn't do any damage, but applies an effect instead. Reading, your opponent discards a card from their hand. If this Pokemon evolved from Salandit during this turn, they discard 2 more cards. This card, when played alongside other hand disruptive cards such as Airy, Grabber and Hand Trimmer, could potentially lead to you discarding your opponent's entire hand, which is very annoying and quite toxic, especially if you manage to pull it off on your second turn going first. Removing a lot of your opponent's resources from their hand and basically putting them in a top deck situation where they need to draw a certain card in order to even try and get back into the game, because if they don't, then during your next turn, you can just discard the card they drew with Salazzle and now start using other disruptive cards such as Misfortune Sisters to begin milling your opponent's deck, while also removing potential item cards they might need in order to make a comeback. This card could quickly find its way into stun and stall decks as a very powerful hand disruption tool, because it's not like we have enough of those in the format already. Next up is a set of cards that are designed to play alongside each other, those being Crabominable, Veluza, as well as the support card, Kofu, which we'll take a look at first. This card reads, put 2 cards from your hand on the bottom of the deck in any order, then draw 4 cards. It's decent. Putting back 2 cards from your hand and drawing 4 new ones can help you remove useless cards or cards you might not need at the moment, and instead dig through your deck for others you may possibly need. But why exactly is this card important for these two Pokemon specifically? Well, it's because of their abilities, which read, attacks used by this Pokemon cost colourless less for each Kofu card in your discard. So you can play a maximum of 4 copies. That means 4 Kofu in your discard can reduce the cost of both Pokemon's attacks by 4 colourless energy. This means Crabominable's attack will only cost a single water energy for 250 damage, while Veluza can use its attack for free, and it deals 110 damage. However, the reliance of a supporter card to reduce cost is not the best. You could play a variety of discard cards or self-mill cards in order to speed up the process, but there are only 2 Pokemon that have this ability, and while 250 damage for 1 energy is very tempting, it requires too much setup in order to make itself reliable. Maybe in future sets we could see more Pokemon with this ability, or more milling cards, but it seems to be more of a one-time gimmick than anything. Crabominable could see play in Slowking, but you can't use the attack back-to-back turns, so Conkeldurr is still the better option for now. Moving on to Charjabug, an 80 HP lightning type Pokemon with a very fitting attack. For 1 lightning energy it reads, search your deck for up to 3 Charjabug and put them onto your bench. Swarming the board with 3 extra copies of itself is very fitting for the Pokemon, especially when you evolve one of these bugs into Vikavolt, specifically the one from Temporal Forces. This Pokemon for a cost of 2 lightning energy does 120 damage, but it also deals 80 more damage for each Charjabug you have in play, meaning that since one of them will need to evolve into a Vikavolt, that leaves an extra 3 on your bench. Granted, none of them have been prized. So you can deal an additional 240 damage for a maximum total of 360 damage, which will KO literally anything in the game, even through resistance. Combine these cards with the plethora of lightning support we have in the format already, and you could have a very strong deck. Granted, you will only have 2 extra bench slots for other Pokemon, which could end up being an issue, but even with 2 Charjabug on your bench, that's still hitting for 280 damage for 2 energy, which is huge. Plus, there are a lot of Pokemon in the format that are weak to lightning, so even with just 1 Charjabug benched, you could still KO your opponent's Pokemon from the double weakness damage. While it probably won't see meta play, it could definitely be a very strong rogue deck. Next up is Dachsbun EX, a 250 HP Psychic type Pokemon with an ability and an attack. Its ability reads, once per turn, when you play this card from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may heal all damage from each of your evolution Pokemon. If you do, discard all energy from each Pokemon healed in this way. A full heal of all your evolution Pokemon isn't a bad effect, the only downside being you need to discard all energy from any of the Pokemon you healed. But decks play plenty of recovery cards to where this isn't really an issue. Plus, if those evolution Pokemon are support Pokemon that you don't need to attach energy to begin with, they just get a free heal if your opponent has been targeting them down with attacks. Its attack also isn't that bad and could make for a decent stall option. For only 2 colourless energy, it does 130 damage, with an added effect of confusing your opponent's active Pokemon. Confusion, while not the best status effect in the game, can still be very useful and annoying for your opponent. They either need to waste time retreating into another Pokemon to cure it, or just take the risk and try to attack, which if they fail means they'll take extra damage. However, against a board state of 2 already powered up Pokemon, your opponent can just retreat into the other one and attack with them instead. They still may need to waste a switch or detach an energy, so it could slow them down a little bit. It's not a bad card, but it could be better. The healing ability is very nice though. Next on the list is Rhyperior, a 200 HP fighting type Pokemon that I literally only included because it could be played in Slowking, as its attack not only deals decent damage, but has the added effect of discarding an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon, which is very powerful. However, the card is also decent on its own thanks to its ability. Reading, as long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, whenever your opponent plays a supporter card from their hand, prevent all effects of that card done to your Pokemon in play. This means that while Rhyperior is in the active spot, your other Pokemon are immune to your opponent's support cards, so cards such as Boss's Orders won't do anything. Meanwhile, your Rhyperior is constantly dealing damage every turn while also removing energy from your opponent's Pokemon if they have any attached to begin with, thus disrupting their board at the same time. It probably won't see play as a standalone deck, but it can be used and abused in other decks such as Slowking. Next is Medicham EX, a 260 HP fighting type Pokemon with 2 attacks. Its second attack for 1 fighting and 2 colorless does 190 damage, and Its damage isn't affected by weakness or resistance, so it can't deal less damage, but it also can't deal more damage, which, to be honest, isn't the best. But its first attack could possibly see some use. For 2 colorless energy, it doesn't do any damage, but it has an effect that reads, put damage on your opponent's active Pokemon until its remaining HP is 50. This attack is mainly useful against V and EX Pokemon given how high their HP can be sometimes, letting you put them in range of an easy knockout, or possibly set up your opponent's board for multiple knockouts depending on what you attack with next. There are also other cards such as Frostlass, which can add on even more damage if that Pokemon has an ability. It's an interesting card that seems very strong and abusable, but only time will tell if it's as powerful as it seems. After all, we've seen some Pokemon in the game that leave your opponent's Pokemon on 10 HP, and those cards don't really see play at all, unless it's in a very niche rogue deck. Next up is Diancie, a 110 HP fighting type Pokemon with an attack that could help counter the all-powerful Lugia. For 1 colorless energy, its attack reads, this attack does 40 damage for each special energy card attached to your opponent's Pokemon. Lugia is pretty much the king of special energy, as that's the only type of energy the deck plays. Not to mention that the deck's 2 strongest cards, Cinccino and Iron Hands EX, are both weak to fighting type Pokemon, so Diancie can very easily one-hit KO these Pokemon with only a single energy attachment. Maybe if Lugia climbs its way back up to being one of the best decks in the format, this card could see play in multiple decks as a decent counter, but as of right now, Lugia is still good, but not something you will see a lot of when it comes to events in the future. Though this card is still worth keeping an eye on for when and if that time comes before Lugia's rotation, or if we receive another special energy type deck in the future. Next up is another card that could be a potential Slowking target, that being Grimmsnarl, a 170 HP Darkness type Pokemon with a very strong gusting attack. For 2 colorless energy, it reads, switch out your opponent's active Pokemon to the bench. Your opponent chooses the new active Pokemon. This attack does 160 damage to the new active Pokemon. The fact that your opponent chooses what Pokemon they put up in the active may seem like a downside, but it really isn't, because they either promote a low HP Pokemon that will just be KO'd, or they promote a high HP Pokemon that is now closer to being KO'd. Add in some bench sniping Pokemon and now you can ping down that Pokemon for even more damage and possibly knock it out alongside other Pokemon for multiple prizes. Another card that possibly won't see play as its own standalone deck, but can very easily be abused by our good friend Slowking. Next is Orthworm EX, a 220 HP Metal type Pokemon with an okay attack. For 4 colorless energy, it does 150 damage, with the added effect of preventing your opponent's active Pokemon from retreating next turn. Those effects are very powerful, but the damage of this attack isn't even enough to 2-hit KO Evolution EX Pokemon. However, Orthworm's ability will greatly help with this issue, reading, when this Pokemon is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, even if this Pokemon is KO'd, put 2 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon for each metal energy attached to this Pokemon. Loading up Orthworm with lots of metal energy is very easy thanks to cards such as Matang from Temporal Forces. Able to look at the top 5 cards of your deck and attach any metal energy you find there to your Pokemon. Since you need 4 energy to use its attack to begin with, if your opponent attacks into Orthworm, that's already an additional 80 damage they will be taking. Give Orthworm a tool card such as Heavy Baton since it has 4 retreat cost. So when it's KO'd, you can move energy elsewhere, or a HP boosting tool card such as Bravery Charm or Hero's Cape so it can survive multiple attacks, or even an A-spec card like Giant Bomb to deal even more revenge damage. And you have a pretty annoying Pokemon to deal with. If you don't attack it, it will just lock your Pokemon in the active spot, but if you do attack it, you take heavy damage in return, depending on how much energy is attached, and could possibly knock yourself out in the process. Definitely something to be on the lookout for, as this deck could be very annoying to deal with if it pops up. Only a couple more cards to go, and next is Raging Bolt, a 130 HP Dragon type Ancient Pokemon with a very strong bench sniping attack. For 1 lightning and 1 fighting energy, it reads, this attack does 30 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon for each energy attached to this Pokemon. Raging Bolt EX has seen a bit of a resurgence thanks to Ogerpon EX. Its ability allows you to attach a grass energy from your hand and draws you cards, as well as giving your Raging Bolt free energy to discard, and it also helps you dig through your deck in the process. This new Raging Bolt could find its place inside of the deck as a way to deal with benched Pokemon. The attack by itself will be dealing 60 damage, so it could help in KOing a Pokemon that your Raging Bolt wasn't able to, or possibly hit something with low HP, or soften up a Pokemon for your Raging Bolt or Ogerpon EX to deal with on a future turn. It probably won't break Raging Bolt, but it gives the deck another attacker and one that can attack benched Pokemon, which is incredible for pretty much any deck. Next up is a card that I forgot to talk about in my video about the new Stellar Pokemon, which doesn't matter because we're talking about it right now. Noctowl, a 100 HP colorless Pokemon with an ability that reads: when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, if you have a Tera Pokemon in play, you may search your deck for up to 2 trainer cards, reveal them and put them into your hand. Being able to grab any 2 trainer cards from your deck is incredibly powerful, letting you grab pretty much anything you need to establish more board presence or power up your already existing board. The thing to note here is that it says 2 trainer cards. This includes items, supporters, tools, and stadiums. The only semi-issue is that you have to have a Tera Pokemon in play in order to use the ability. So if you evolve into it without a Tera Pokemon on the field, then you'll just miss out on the effect. This card is a very powerful piece of support for Tera decks, and there is the possibility it could see a lot of play, especially alongside the new Stellar Pokemon and any new Tera or Stellar Pokemon we receive in future sets, just because it's able to search pretty much anything in your deck. We also have another card to go alongside Noctowl, that being Fan Rotom. Its ability reads: once during your turn, you can search your deck for 3 colorless Pokemon with 100 HP or less. Reveal them and put them into your hand. You can't use more than 1 Fang Call ability during your turn. Letting you search for any 3 colorless Pokemon is also very strong. You can not only search for Noctowl, but its pre-evolution Hoothoot, as well as other cards such as Pidgey, Bidoof, the new Bouffalant, which reduces the damage your basic colorless Pokemon take, and many more. A perfect partner for the numerous pieces of colorless support we will be receiving in this set, and possibly more sets to come. That's it for the Pokemon. Now moving on to the item and supporter cards, in which there isn't much to talk about since a large chunk of them I have already discussed in other videos. First up is the tool card Gravity Stone, which reads: if the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot, the retreat cost of both active Pokemon is 1 colorless more. A card that will possibly find its home in Stun and Stall decks. A deck such as Esperath has the ability to make your opponent's attacks cost more energy, and with this card by its side, it can now also make the retreat costs higher, which is technically a boost to the deck, since your opponent will need to attach more energy in order to attack and retreat, thus increasing Esperath's damage. Plus you could use Boss or Prime Catcher to bring up a high retreat cost Pokemon, that now has an even higher retreat cost, and heavily slow down the pace of the game in your favour. Its effect is reciprocal, but if you attach it to a Pokemon with 1 retreat or even 3 retreat, it's not that bad. An interesting tool card that could be very annoying to play around if you don't have any switch cards. And the last card of this video is the supporter card, Breya, which reads: you can play this card only if your opponent has exactly 2 prize cards remaining. Until the end of this turn, if your opponent's active Pokemon is knocked out by damage from one of your Tera Pokemon's attacks, take 1 more prize card. This card is incredibly powerful. The effect is a bit specific on when it can be used and what it works with, but that doesn't matter. A lot of the time you and your opponent are looking to knock out EX Pokemon to take the most prize cards that you can. Some decks have the ability to knock out multiple basic Pokemon or a combination of the two, taking 3 or 4 prize cards. Applying an Amp You Very Much or Altered Creation like ability to your Tera Pokemon for the turn could very easily turn the game in your favour. Non-EX and V Pokemon now give 2 prize cards, EX and V Pokemon now give 3. This card is quickly going to find its place in multiple decks. As a Dragapult EX player, I will be adding this card to my deck. The ability to knock out an active EX and maybe a basic or another EX on the bench could lead to the possibility of taking 5 prize cards from a single attack, which is just ridiculous to think about. This card will definitely see play. Overall, some very strong pieces of support and some very interesting cards altogether. In terms of how they will shape up the meta, it's all up in the air. As of this video, the set has been released in Japan for a little over a week, so players have been building and testing with these cards and will only continue to do so over the next few weeks, allowing us to learn and build upon what works and what doesn't, deciding what we should and shouldn't play once the set releases over in the West. I personally don't think this set will have much of an impact on the game. Some decks have started to make a resurgence, such as Palkia, thanks to the new Area Zero Stadium. Charizard is still and will probably continue to be the best deck of the format until something is released that can overpower it, or until it rotates, which won't be for another 2 years. While it won't drastically change the meta, it will leave an impact, and it has brought with it a new type of Pokemon with the Stellar type cards. Cards that could get even better depending on what support and other Pokemon we see in future sets, as the Scarlet and Violet era will soon be coming to its close.